The math said the colony was dead. We brought shovels. Athari Prime spun below the sterile observation deck like a rotten piece of fruit. Thick yellow clouds of necrotic spore choked the entire southern landmass. High Assessor Valther watched the main orbital feed with absolute cold certainty. His bioluminescent dermal ridges glowed a steady, calm cyan. The algorithms of the galactic health ascendancy were never wrong. Death was just a simple equation, a problem to be solved. The massive computers had calculated the exact day this world would fall silent. No panic, no plays, no escape. Yet Dr. Silas Corvo stood in the center of the pristine command room, ruining the perfect silence. The human doctor held a battered carbon fiber pocket watch in his dirty hands. Click, click, click. He wound the tiny metal stem with a thumb wrapped in cheap white medical tape. He wore a faded field coat that smelled of old rust and heavy chemical scrubbers. A primitive toy, Valther said. His voice was smooth and flat. Your species is too obsessed with counting brief moments. Corvo did not look up from the brass hands. His eyes looked hollow, like dirty water left in a tin cup. It keeps time. We need time down there. You have exactly 20 days before your central nervous systems fail, Valther replied. He tapped the glowing glass screen. The math is clear. You are a rounding error. Corvo finally put the watch deep inside his coat. He did not argue. He did not puff up his chest. He just turned and walked toward the dropship bay, his heavy boots leaving faint gray dust on the clean white floor. What I saw in those ashes broke my math forever. You need to hear this. 2 months passed in the dark ash wards. The death toll climbed exactly as predicted by the great machines. The native colonists fell first. They coughed up black dust and shook wildly until their hearts finally stopped. Then the elite healers broke. The Sylvani medics had crystal-laced nerves built by careful genetics for perfect empathy. That deep empathy destroyed them. They felt every single death as a sharp physical pain. By week 8, the Sylvani chief begged for immediate extraction. She wept thick black tears over the static-filled comms. Valther approved the rescue ships at once. It made perfect sense. The horror was simply too much for a sane, healthy mind to process. The Ascendancy pulled their best people back to the stars, a perfectly logical retreat. He waited for the human request to leave. He checked the message queue every hour. It never came. Instead, Corvo and his small team pushed deeper into the worst hot zones. They dragged heavy canvas tents into the ruined city squares. They set up crude light rigs powered by noisy gas engines. Valther ran a new scan from his high orbit. The data results made his cyan ridges flash yellow in sudden, sharp confusion. The Ascendancy set the hard biological limit for continuous trauma care at 200 hours. A normal brain would snap after that. Corvo's team had just passed 400 hours. They did not request breaks. They just stopped following normal daylight rules. Valther spent week after week locked at the orbital console. He stopped going back to his quiet private quarters. The silent feed from the planet's surface became a dark obsession. Down below, the yellow clouds grew much thicker. Heavy ash fell like dirty, wet snow over the ruined colony streets. It covered the broken buildings in a thick gray blanket. In the middle of it all, the humans kept working, cutting, stitching, and burning infected flesh. They worked in the dark. They worked in the cold rain. They worked when the local power grid completely died. A warning light blinked on Valther's main screen. A new question formed in his mind. How were they staying awake? He pulled up the digital supply manifests. The Ascendancy had sent 20 crates of advanced neural stimulants. These clean drugs kept soldiers alert for days by tricking the brain's chemistry. Valther looked at the inventory numbers. He blinked his multispectral ocular implants twice. The crates remained locked and sealed. The humans had not opened a single one. This is not possible, Valther whispered to the empty, bright room. He pulled up a tight visual feed on Dr. Corvo. The doctor was leaning against a cracked concrete wall. His skin was the color of old paper. His chest barely moved as he breathed the filtered air. He closed his eyes. Valther started a digital timer on his screen. Exactly 45 minutes later, a cheap battery alarm rang in the cold tent. Corvo woke up instantly. He drank a cup of cold, dark liquid, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, and put his bloody gloves right back on. They were running on microsleeps, running on nothing but dirty water and pure spite. The noise inside the canvas tents was a constant, dull roar. It was the sound of failing lungs and hissing oxygen tanks. Valther turned up the audio on his orbital feed. He wanted to hear the human panic. He expected them to scream at the sky to beg their distant gods for help. He heard nothing but clipped, short commands. They spoke only when a job required words. The rest of the time, they worked in a heavy, dead silence. Valther watched a feed from a secondary medical station. A young human nurse was working on a local colonist. The sick alien was thrashing wildly in blind pain. The nurse did not speak a single word of comfort. She did not sing a soft healing song like the Sylvani doctors did. She simply pinned the large creature to the metal table with her own body weight and drove a long steel needle straight into its chest. It was not gentle, it was highly effective. She pulled the needle out, wiped the dark fluid on her pants, and moved immediately to the next dirty cot. There was zero hesitation. There was zero empathy in her dark eyes. There was only the brutal, mechanical drive to keep the meat breathing. Valther asked the ship's main computer to run the survival odds again. He fed it the new raw data. No sleep, no clean food, constant exposure to the deadly spore. The massive computer spit out a flat 0% chance of success. It flashed a red warning, suggesting the orbital visual feed was corrupted by dust. Valther knew the feed was perfectly fine. The ascendancy math was simply blind to this specific kind of creature. The algorithms were built for sane minds. By month 5, the massive death rate finally slowed down. It was not a magical cure. The humans just refused to let bodies shut down. They fought the spore plague with brutal, ugly violence. They cut out infected tissue without any painkillers when the good drugs ran out. They used heat to seal wounds. They used sheer force to keep lungs pumping. Valther's glowing ridges turned a deep, panicked orange. The math was falling apart in front of his eyes. The grand algorithms predicted total collapse, but the human numbers stayed stubbornly flat. At month 6, a heavy structural beam cracked in the main medical tent. Valther watched the feed as the thick steel crashed down. It crushed a metal table full of glass vials right next to Corvo. The noise must have been deafening. A normal creature would jump. A normal creature would scream or run for cover. Corvo did not even blink. His tired hands stayed perfectly steady inside a colonist's open chest. He simply turned his head and whispered for a different metal clamp. He did not care that he almost died. He expected the roof to fall. He lived as if the roof was always falling. This was the specific wrong detail that kept Valther awake at night. It was not simple bravery. Bravery meant fighting deep fear. Corvo showed absolutely no fear because the horror felt completely normal to him. The human was entirely comfortable at the end of the world. Valther dug deep into the restricted ascendancy data banks. He searched for Earth. He wanted to see what kind of lush paradise built tough healers like this. The old files loaded slowly. Images of irradiated wastes filled the screen. He saw heavy resource wars fought over dirty water. He saw poisoned oceans and gray skies. Earth was not a gentle garden, it was a planetary meat grinder. The cold realization hit the High Assessor like a hard physical blow to the chest. The Ascendancy thought they had hired fresh, hopeful medical volunteers. They had not. Earth mass-produced highly functional trauma vectors. Month 8 arrived with a strange silence. The terrible spore finally ran its long life cycle and died off. The thick air on Athari Prime slowly cleared, leaving a pale blue sky. Millions of sick colonists were still breathing. They should have been dead months ago. Valther took the very first fast shuttle down to the ruined surface. He wore his pristine white diagnostic robes. He expected to find proud heroes shouting and celebrating a great victory. He stepped out of the shiny ship. Dry gray ash crunched loud under his heavy boots. The sky above was clear, but the ground looked like a massive open grave. He walked slowly through the human camp. There was no cheering, there was no joy at all. The human medics sat on empty boxes or leaned against ruined stone walls. They stared at the dirt with blank faces. Valther stopped near the burned remains of the main tent. He lifted his hand and mechanically brushed a speck of gray ash off his clean white sleeve. Corvo sat on a broken wooden crate, a man thinner than a skeleton. His faded coat was completely covered in dried black blood. "You saved them," Valther said. His voice shook slightly. "Against all statistical models, you saved them." Corvo did not smile. He reached deep into his pocket and pulled out the battered carbon fiber watch. Click, click, click. He wound the tiny stem with his taped thumb. "Earth does not make saviors," Valther said. The true words tasted like bitter ash in his mouth, a terrible truth. "It makes survivors. You didn't beat the plague with advanced medicine." Corvo slowly looked up. The deep hollows under his eyes were darker than empty space. "You can't break what is already broken," the human doctor whispered. They did not heal, they did not sleep, they just endured. The true heavy horror settled deep into Valther's chest. The Great Ascendancy measured all compassion with clean, neat numbers, but humanity measured it in deep scars. The humans were just highly functional ghosts, wandering blindly from one disaster to the next. "Where is the next drop zone?" Corvo asked. His voice was dead and flat. "We are packed." He did not ask for a shiny medal. He did not ask to go home, he asked for the next bad nightmare. Valthor looked down at the humans shaking hands. They were wrapped in fresh white tape. The old watch rested in the dirty palm. The thin brass hands swept across the scratched glass face. The ticking was no longer a measurement of time. It was a mechanical metronome for their endless, terrifying survival. A cold wind blew hard through the ruined camp. Thick ash swirled around the heavy boots of the tired doctors standing in a long line. The metal dropship ramp lowered with a loud, heavy grind. Corvo put the watch in his pocket and picked up his black bag.